So, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Amy Janess. I'm programming coordinator at the Nantucket Atheneum, and I'm joined by my colleague Janet, who's behind the scenes at the moment. Before we start, I just want to say that at the end, our guests tonight will be answering questions. You can submit a question in the chat or in the Q&A. You'll find buttons for both of those at the bottom of your screen. You can put a question in there as we go along, or you can do it at the end. Either way works just fine. And I'm just going to say a few words by way of introduction about both of our guests tonight, and then we'll begin. So author and journalist Bill Buford is a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, where he has also served as fiction editor. He's the author of the books Among the Thugs and Heat, an amateur's adventures as kitchen slave, line cook, pasta maker, and apprentice to a Dante-quoting butcher in Tuscany, and the book to be discussed tonight, Dirt, Adventures in Lyon as a chef in training, father, and sleuth looking for the secret of French cooking. Buford has received a Marshall Scholarship, a James Beard Award, and the Comune di Roma Premio Sandro Onofri for narrative reportage. He lived in England for 18 years, where he's the founding editor of the literary magazine Granta and the founding publisher of Granta Books. And Tom Proch is a graduate of Johnson & Wales Culinary School and started working in Nantucket restaurants in 1983, eventually becoming executive chef at the Club Car. After decades in that role, Tom left the restaurant world in 2014 to take over Nantucket High School's Culinary Arts program, where he guides island teens interested in pursuing a culinary education. So please join me in welcoming Bill Buford and Tom Proch to the Atheneum Zoom stage for what is going to be a fascinating and delicious conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Bill, first I want to say that I'm so pleased and I feel privileged to be asked to chat with you because I got to say, back in the early 2000s, I heard Bill Buford and I got excited because not only am I a chef, I'm a drummer. And I said, wow, that's the drummer from Yes. Well, it's Bill Buford, so my mistake. But nevertheless, I read Heat, and it was fabulous. I'm not a big reader, but when I find something that turns me on, I just bang right through it. And I was very inspired. I was braising rabbit, making rabbit ragu, and there was so much influence that came out of that for me. I was really turned on by it. So I really appreciated that book. So when I heard about your recent book, Dirt, I couldn't wait to get into it. And for you to go to Lyon, I haven't experienced Lyon, and I'll share it with you. But it seemed like a huge undertaking for you. I was like, how's he gonna do this? And I was flipping the pages pretty fast because it was fascinating. But I do want to ask you, what was the point where you decided to write this book and pick up your family and move to Lyon? That must have been stressful.
The decision wasn't stressful. Everything that followed on from that decision was stressful. The decision to go to France, I made at the end of Heat. And it was in fact, I think I hear a glass of Italian Lambrusco. I know this is a French evening, but thinking of Heat. Yeah. When I finished Heat, I thought, this has been like one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Working in kitchens, going to Italy, learning Italian, going into the culture where I felt, I'm still a foreigner, but I felt really, really comfortable in the country. And I didn't want to stop. And there was a natural link between Italy and France because the Italians believe they invented French cuisine, a position that the French have not endorsed very enthusiastically. But more to the point, I always wanted to have French training. So I kind of threw it down there at the end of the book, is that, now that I'm done with this, I'm going to France. And then it took me really a long time to do it. I kept putting it off. I worked as a staff writer. I did longer and longer pieces. I disappeared in the Amazon pursuing the secret of chocolate. My wife got more and more stressed, like, go do this book you're meant to be doing. Do this book. And I was afraid. I was afraid of the language, which I couldn't speak. I was afraid of the disruption. But I think I was really afraid of was being in a French kitchen. You just look at a basic French culinary textbook, and it just goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages. And I can remember looking at the one that Dorothy Hamilton gave me for the French Culinary Institute and thought, there's no way I'm going to learn this. What I would have to subject my brain to learn this. So I just put it off, and finally we reached a point where it had to happen, and my wife nudged me a bit, and we did it. Of course, by then we had 2 twin boys and a much more complicated life. But it was daunting. I procrastinated. I'm still astonished I ever made it.
Well, in the beginning of your book, you were talking about, I think you were working, was it Citronelle?
Citronelle.
And I know what it's like to be busy in a restaurant and you come home and, everybody's wiped out. And I think there was one point you came home, and I think your wife fell asleep, and both your kids are sitting in front of the refrigerator with the door open and food everywhere. And I'm like, oh, that's unbelievable.
It was actually worse than that, because I was then in Washington, D.C. Okay. And I was actually having a really nice time. And at the end, I'd always make myself a tuna burger and have a glass of wine at the bar. And then I was staying in a hotel then. And my wife couldn't reach me, and she was there all by herself. And the twin boys that got out of their cribs, first of all, discovered they could get out of their cribs. Second of all, discovered how to open the refrigerator door. Third, figured out how to open the freezer door. And they had ice cream, eggs, and milk. They're splashing on the floor.
Good times.
That was a tough moment in our marriage. There would turn out to be tougher ones after that, but that was a tough one.
Yeah. I remember in the summer here, I mean, it's busy. So I would go in at 7:30 in the morning, prep. I would take a break in the afternoon for a couple hours and then head back in for service. So I would get home, midnight. So I didn't really get to see either of my sons. So I would bring home a nice platter, a grand dessert every once in a while, and wake the kids up and bring them downstairs, and we'd sit there at the table and just plow through this dessert.
This is the night. This is the night when you got in after yours.
Yeah. This is midnight.
Oh, fantastic!
But it was the summertime, they didn't have school or anything.
Yeah, fantastic.
But for it was a fond memory for me, and hopefully it'll be something that they remember as well. But you also, once you got to Lyon, you were looking for a place to stage, and you went to La Pyramide, and I was so excited. As I'm reading, I'm like, I hope he gets in here. I hope he gets in here. And he didn't, but Ferdinand Point, who he's the man. I mean, that's where Paul Bocuse trained in the Trois Brothers. And I happen to have a copy of this book. I think it's published in 1968.
Oh, you got it.
Nice. It's an amazing book. And I very carefully lend it out once in a while, but I make sure I get it back. But I love the stories in there. And he was such a unique person. And starting your day off with a magnum of champagne is interesting as well.
Who wouldn't? Yeah, for a bit of background, that was kind of like that was the Mecca for French chefs, and for any foreign chef who wanted to learn French chops, the French technique. He's not that well known now because he died of just a massive cardiac seizure, I think in 1955. But he managed to train a whole generation of the chefs that would later become known as Nouvelle Cuisine. And so he was the first person who took all these French classics that have been made over and over again for 200 years, and then just very discreetly just started innovating them. And he was just a huge, huge figure. And I thought, yeah, that will work. I'll go there. And the current chef in charge said, no. You, an American? In my kid? No, a journalist? No, absolutely not. Dickhead.
Yeah, you must have got a lot of pushback,
I didn't think it was going to be this hard. I had a couple leads and some introductions. One was at a famous restaurant called Lyon de Lyon. And my wife and I slipped in there incognito on a Sunday night. The main chef, the owner, wasn't there. Everybody was in a really bad mood. They had this little room with a very low ceiling where they put all the foreigners. And my wife's French was perfect. But I mean, in any case, I was, I happened to be a very engaged potential visitor. And there's a guy next to us getting very drunk saying, "You're in here because that's where they put all the English speakers, and I'm in here because I'm practicing my English." And just an appalling service. And at the end, I must have had too much to drink. I summoned someone around everyone said, "This is the worst meal I can remember in a very, very, very long time." And I kissed everybody on the cheek. I kissed the maitre d', I kissed the chef, I kissed some waiter that was coming through and said, "And here's my card." And my wife at that point was hiding behind a bus because she didn't know what I was going to do. And she said, "You gave him your card? This is our first restaurant in Lyon, and you gave him your card?" It wasn't so easy. There's a real...
you were prepared to be thrown out of the country.
There's a real suspicion there. Yeah, that is true, probably. There's a real suspicion, the suspiciousness of foreigners in Lyon. Lyon is very proud of itself, doesn't think anybody gets it. They're probably right. It has a kind of internal logic and heart that isn't available or visible to other people. And they really don't like foreigners. And it took a while to get through. Definitely took a while to get through.
Well, I did go to Johnson & Wales, but I feel like my real lessons didn't happen until I got into a real restaurant.
Yeah.
For me, it had to be.
It's true.
Yeah, it had to be hands-on and feel the pressure. And I worked for a man named Michael Shannon, who is now still on the right side of the grass. He's 88, and he lives down in Connecticut now. But he was the chef owner of the Club Car on Nantucket, and I started with him. He had trained in Lyon, France. He was born in Ireland, and he was interested in cooking, so his father sent him to Lyon. This is in the mid to late 40s. And he was what they call old school, but I knew how lucky I was to be working with him. But he was, as I said, old school. So there was pots and pans flying, screaming, yelling. I mean, he was an Irishman trained by crazy Frenchmen. So
that's a bad combination.
Is it? Yeah, especially on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
But in my first year there, my main goal was not to get yelled at. So if he told me to slice it this way, I sliced it that way. I just did, the less he yells, the better. And I'll tell you what, I remember sauteing a dish, ready to put it out. He took it, looked at it, right in the trash. And that just crushes you. But it also, in the old school, that teaches you, don't do it that way again. You do it the right way.
Quickly. You learn pretty quickly. I was astonished because I ended up at Le Maire Brasier as a cook. And they had just reopened. They've been closed for a long time. They were watching their money very carefully. They did get 2 Michelin stars instantly, but they were definitely watching their money very carefully. I became essential, mainly because I don't think they wanted to hire anyone else. So I had the real full experience. They forgot I was a journalist. They treated me like they would treat anybody else, and they treated me sometimes appallingly, which seemed very rough at the time, but the whole time I was thinking, oh, this is copy. I get to write about this. This is, I can't believe I'm getting this experience. But I have to admit, at the end of it, it was a rough experience, but boy, did I learn a lot. And I learned it. I mean, to this day, I still got some guys looking over my shoulder at me. When I get to my cutting board, and I'm never going to get a piece of garlic on my cutting board, or an onion, or and I've got holding a whole knife thing, and I'm still got some guy looking over me. It's not a pleasant experience, and it's open to all kinds of abuses. I saw some. I'm sure you saw many, but boy, do you learn by it. So it was for me, it was great. I had a kind of old school education, and it was great.
Yeah, there was times when I was reading this and I'm thinking, well, how old is Bill? How old are you? You're probably
old. I'm old. Someone asked me that recently, like, how old were you when you went there? And I thought, damn, I didn't say, did I? I think I said I was 54 when I got there, and 55 when I got into the kitchen. Yeah.
We're about the same age. But I'm thinking, as a grown man, I wouldn't have put up with that for 2 minutes. I would have dragged one of those chefs right out the back door. But you had your eyes on the prize. You knew what you were there for.
Yeah. I was there to go through this and write about it and learn. One of the sort of gratifying treats for me was the French chef Daniel Boulou, who lives in New York and runs many restaurants called Danielle, or different versions of it. We became friends because he grew up in just outside of Lyon, and his parents are alive, and he's got brothers and sisters there, and he tries to go back every time he has a chance. And when he's there, he becomes this completely different person. He becomes tender and soft, and he's not this kind of Manhattan chef who's always on display. He's really, really a different person. And he invited me to cook with him in New York and he had a cookbook, and he wanted to do 20 of the classic dishes that he learned in Lyon. And I was still living in Lyon, and I flew over and I did these dishes. And it's a little book inside of the book that he published. But I was surprised at how comfortable I was in a French restaurant, living in Lyon and working in restaurants. I was immediately comfortable. In fact, actually more comfortable than I was in the streets in New York. But I was comfortable. I learned how to be in a French kitchen, and I'm happy about that. I'm now older, but I think I can still be comfortable in a French kitchen.
Good for you. And I also I enjoyed Bob the baker and your experiences with him and delivering to all the different restaurants, and that was fascinating. I was right there with you. I was living it.
Thank you. Bob is a sweetheart. Was a sweetheart. He, when I couldn't get into a restaurant, when I got turned down by Brazier, though I went back and got in eventually, and I turned down by La Pyramide, and I went and asked Bob if I could work for him, and he said no. I thought, what? No? You're like, no. But his appeal, and I did work for him. His appeal was he made the best bread that any of us have ever eaten in our lives, and the best bread that the Lyonnais have eaten in their lives. And it was just a gift what he did. It was it wasn't just learning how to, it wasn't, you go there not to learn how to make bread, because you can learn that from anybody really, but you learn how to make his bread. And it was, it was different. You didn't eat too much of it. You never felt bloated. It had amazing flavor. It was long in the mouth. It was a real, it's because of the flour and where the flour comes from, and basically it's earth that hasn't been ruined. And it was the possibly most profound lesson you could have in respecting the planet, because this is coming from, and there's places around France that are like this. This is a place where the land has been not ruined, and that's where the wheat comes from, and that's where the flour comes from, and that's what he makes. That's what he uses in his bread, and it was like a life lesson.
Fascinating. And I have a very short experience in Lyon. My wife is English, so we go at least once a year to England to visit family. And my wife surprised me for my 40th birthday to a trip to Lyon. So we left our children with my wife's parents, and we flew into Lyon very late at night. I don't speak French. My wife doesn't either, but we let the cabbie know where we wanted to go. So he brought us to the hotel. It was big buses out front. So we got our bag and we came around. Door was locked and we look in there and the clerk buzzes. The door opens up. We go inside. Now it's my wife, myself, and the clerk. And all of a sudden I hear, wheat, boom. Somebody smashes into the plate glass window. Boom again. I'm like, what the hell is going on? This guy comes through the broken window with a mask and a pistol. And as I said, I don't speak French, but I'm pretty sure he was trying to tell me to put my hands up. So the clerk came around.
This is your first moment
yeah.
in Lyon?
This is my first hour in Lyon. So the clerk comes around the front of the desk and he's hiding. My wife runs that way. I'm standing there looking at this guy. My wife said she looked at me and I was pissed off because he just ruined my experience. So they were going for the cash drawer or something. So he went back out the window and they reached down the street. You know, I'm standing like, what the hell just happened? And the clerk stands up.
Did he get cash?
I don't know. I wasn't paying attention.
All right, of course.
But the clerk is like, oh, I think today is my last day. And so he wants to get back to business. So he's like, do you want a wake-up call? I was like, yeah, I just had a wake-up call. There was a guy waving a pistol. So I said, can I get a drink? My hands are shaking, you know? So he goes over to the bar, which is closed, and he comes back with a bottle of Evian. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Anyway, my wife was upset, obviously, and, you know, thinking about our kids, and she wanted to go home the next day, which happened to be Easter Sunday, so we couldn't get a flight. So now I had 24 hours to eat as much Lyonnaise food as I possibly could. And I did. And it's funny because we went to the Brasserie Georges.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it in the book, and I was so excited. You got turned away that night, however, but
we went back many times. That was Christmas Eve, and it was packed. Yeah.
That was such a huge hall.
Can you believe that it was packed? I mean, it's packed all night long. We couldn't. I phoned at 7 o'clock and I said, "There's no way," because it seats. And it must seat 800 people. It's an old-fashioned. It's like a 19th century brasserie that they used to build by the train stations, and it's right next to the train station. And they brew their own beer, and it's got this old tradition of, you know, waiters who are wearing the same dinner jacket they were wearing last year, and they do a really good steak tartare and great frite, and it's like a 19th century. It's right out of the 19th century.
I had the proper Lyonnaise onion soup, and I had the choucroute. And everywhere I go, I get a menu no matter where I go. Can I get a copy of the menu? So I come back to Nantucket and I show my chef, Michael Shannon. He looks at the menu and says, "That's the first place I ever worked." And he said, this was in the 40s. He said, "My first job was running pitchers of beer to the kitchen," because they had a brewery next door.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they still do.
Yeah. So
Lyon, when you mentioned your first thing is like some guy breaks the window, you know, with a gun. Lyon's a rough city. It's there's some drug traffic from Marseille, but there's mainly it's changing, but it is a rough city. There's a lot of corrupt flicks, corrupt cops. There's a big scene of prostitutes. There's a little bit of organized crime. You don't feel, it's not a boutique city. It feels there's a lot of Lyon which feels like it hasn't quite been reconstructed since World War II. And it was intimidating to us when we got there. The nights, the weekend nights are really rough, and there's a lot of fights and a lot of drinking. But it had once we got comfortable, I mean, you're on guard. But once we got comfortable, it has an authenticity that it feels like old France. It's not boutique France. It's not pretty France. It's a very pretty city, and it is being beautified, and it'll no doubt become, it'll host an Olympics or something like that. It'll be changed forever, like Barcelona was.
Right.
It reminds me. I'm old enough that I went to Barcelona before the Olympics, and Barcelona was one of those cities that got a lot of grittiness, and Lyon's got that, and it means you don't recommend it to everybody for travel, but if you want to see the real France, it's there. It was a wonderful discovery for us.
Yeah, I remember we went across the river, and there was like Roman ruins, like a
yeah. You
you
crossed the River Saône, and you went through Via Lyon, which is the oldest Renaissance habitation in the world. It's a UNESCO site, and then you go up the hill, and you have this big Roman community that was there. And there's a lot of Roman roads, not just a few Roman. I mean, there's a whole bunch of structures up there. It's fascinating.
Such a deep history there.
Deep.
But getting into one of the restaurants you were working in, you were describing, and I was with you all the way. The chef had taken the chicken thighs, and he took the skin, and he took foie gras, and he was making a amuse-bouche, but I never heard about it plated. I'm like, well, what did they do with it? I don't know what they did with it.
Oh, good point. I didn't. The plating was quite simple. The plating was quite simple. It's, that in Lyon, the big chicken is the poulet de Brest, the chickens from Brest. And so that's everybody does chickens from Brest, and they do it many different ways. And a lot of people like just the supreme, the breast, but that means they have the whole rest of the chicken. So this was like all the leftovers of the many supremes de Brest. It was like lots of thighs, which you roast slowly in some fat, but it's got a lot of fat naturally anyways, until it's all cooked, and you can peel the chicken off the bone, and then you can peel the skin off the chicken, and you flatten it out, and then you put foie gras on top, and then you put a meat jelly on top of that, and then you put the skin on top, and then the foie gras, and then a meat jelly. So it looks like a brownie. It looks completely delicious, and then you let it set, and then you have these little delicious cubes with a little bit of salad on the side. It's a great.
I could go for that.
Yeah, it's great. If you're hungry and you're a little panicky and you're wondering how long dinner's going to take, and you're given that as soon as you come in, you're all the alarm bells go off. The great trick of an amuse-bouche, which is the first thing you give someone when they come into the restaurant, is to stop the panic. You're hungry. You've been starving all day. You're looking for this big meal. You don't know if you're going to make it. We give you a little bit of thing, and you feel happy. Yeah. Sparkling wine, you're happy.
I appreciated the pride you took in making the personnel, the staff meal. And I think a lot of restaurants don't necessarily feed their staff, but we always had a staff dinner at 5 o'clock, and it was always delicious. And I did appreciate reading, because sometimes you got to throw it together, whatever you have left over, right? You're not going to use the best stuff you have, but you're going to make it nice, and you take pride in that.
This was because I was in the back and doing prep, and I wanted to get on the line. I wanted to be a line cook, and Mathieu Vianney, the chef who actually went to Johnson & Wales, though that was just so he could be near his American girlfriend, said, well, to do that, you've got to do the staff meal. The staff meal is like about 25 to 30 people, sometimes more. And it was 11 o'clock in the morning, which is a pretty good time to eat, I have to admit. And in the evening, it was assumed that people did their own stuff. you wouldn't feed them in the evening, and you would never give people food. It's different from an American restaurant. You would never touch the food. And so the meal you made at 11 o'clock was a very big deal. And that introduced me to using all the different kinds of heat, and finding my way around the kitchen and learning punctuality. And it was very uncomfortable in the beginning, and I was made to feel very bad, and I felt very bad. But in the end, it was really brilliant. I was just so, I mean, in the end, it was like 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks later. The best, my favorite day was the Friday, because the Friday there was leftover. Usually you'd have a protein that would organize your meal around. But with the leftovers, it was all improvisation. It was making stuff up. It was, people would sort of have their little stash there. They'd come over and say, "Can you cook this? And can you cook that?" And I found it so buzzy. It was so, and also my whole dynamic had changed, because I was no longer the rookie, the weirdo, the American, whatever, the fancy guy. By then I'd earned my place, and they knew I could cook whatever they gave me. And so they kept giving me more and more stuff. And I go, "Wow, why did you give me that? I got 15 minutes. It was such a state of, it's kind of an ecstasy. It was like I was working on adrenaline. I was on this time clock. And I was doing all these fast things. I was doing like 12, 14 different things at once. I took lots of pictures of just like of some of these big spreads, but none of them come out, because I think, I took them with my phone, and my phone was probably covered with grease, and it's disgusting.
But it seemed to me that you also at that point gained a lot of respect from your fellow chefs.
Yeah, finally. I was they treated me as an equal, and that was a big deal. That's what, if I think back on what I was doing, putting off this trip for when I finished my book about Italian cooking and how I wanted to go to France and learn French cooking, I thought there's no way that I'm gonna follow that trajectory and actually survive it and be someone who can do this. And those were like the first moments when I realized, wow, I'm doing it. I'm doing it, and I'm completely comfortable in the kitchen, and I'm having fun. It was a lot of fun, actually.
I really enjoyed the fact you mentioned cooking sweetbreads. I love I'll eat anything. I love all the offals. And the chef that I work for, Michael Shannon, he did all those dishes. In fact, when he worked in New York City in the 50s, I don't know what the club was called, but there was a club that all the French chefs belonged to. And on Sundays, most head executive chefs had Sundays off. They all got together and they cooked the sweetbreads and brains, and that, America wasn't ready for that in the 50s. But that's where he also learned a lot of these dishes. I mean, the club car where I worked on Nantucket was the only restaurant on the island that had calf's brains on the menu. And I'm happy to say both my kids love them.
They're obviously well brought up. Sweetbreads was such a discovery. They're actually very easy to cook. I mean, there's some technical stuff for you in preparing them, but they're I mean, you did it in a saute pan to begin with, and then you put it in the oven to finish off, and they kind of puffed up and crisped up, and then you have this very intense veal reduction sauce goes on top, and it's really scrumptious. It's really, really delicious.
I love it. And just the smell of coming off the pan when you're cooking them is wonderful.
Yeah.
We did them various ways, usually Grenoble Blaze, but Normandy style, shallots, the Calvados, touch of cream.
Right.
Wonderful.
Right.
Probably not that healthy, but it's a nice treat.
Yeah, there's a lot of French dishes which aren't healthy, but one of the things I discovered was how people eat in restaurants is different from how people eat at home. And in Lyon, at least, they do still eat at home. And it was a great understanding about how French cooking works. Because we lived in a big building, and it was kind of organized around a square a little bit. So it was originally a monastery, I think. So we knew what everybody on all the floors were doing, especially in the summertime when the windows were open and you could hear them cooking. And we got to know the people when they come back from the market as they're coming home. And there was a practice of feeding the family at midday, and people would all come home for midday lunch, which is really seems now quite radical. And midday lunch was punishing enough that if you had to go up the stairs, it was killer, because everybody's cooking lunch and you're hungry and it smells delicious. But there's a big effort at home cooking. And the home cooking is sensible. It's and on Sunday nights it's usually going to be soup, and it's modest. It's healthy cooking. But when you go to a restaurant, then you go to a restaurant. I hope one of the things that'll come out of this pandemic is that we will start to appreciate what it means to go to a restaurant. We take it for granted, but a restaurant is a great privilege. And when the French go to a restaurant, they want all the courses. They're going to go for the richest dish they want. They don't want small portions. They want hearty portions, and they're always going to have dessert and maybe cheese afterwards. They're not going to limit themselves. They're going to the restaurant. It's a great privilege that here's someone who's done your shopping, done your cooking, and they're serving you, and they're cleaning up afterwards. This is a great privilege. If you're at home doing two jobs, and the wife's doing this, and the husband's doing this, and you're cooking at home, when you go to a restaurant, it's a treat. And the cooking reflects that. Restaurant cooking is different from home cooking. Restaurant cooking is a complete privilege. And people don't eat sweetbreads every night, and they don't eat desserts every night, and they don't eat that much butter and that much cream until they go to a restaurant. It's a great, great privilege to go to a restaurant. Looking forward to going to restaurants.
Yeah, I am too. I know you mentioned another dish, demi-dual. And I had learned that from Michael Shannon as well. It meant half morning, black and white, basically. And I used to do sauteed veal medallions, one with a demi, black truffle demi, and then I would coat the other with like a white truffle cream. And there was your black and white.
Fine. The idea of this, the demi-doi, was it's doi in French is widow, and so it's like it's like a or mourning, I think it is actually. So it's like you're in half mourning, and you would take if they do it with the chicken, and they take the chicken and they loosen up the skin from. Well, they did it from the back. It's easier if you do it from the front, but you loosen up the skin and then fill up the skin with slices of black truffle. So it looks like you have a black bird, which is a bird in mourning. Yeah, that was one of the expensive dishes. That was, again, a poulet de Bresse, the chicken from Bresse.
Right.
And you'd have the special sauce, and that was one of the big ones.
Wonderful. And then you mentioned you did a whole bit on the Béarnaise sauce, which I love, and then turning it into a Charon sauce. Those are wonderful sauces.
I never paid much attention to Béarnaise until we went. We had a kind of miserable Friday night where the night was beautiful. It was summery, and Lyon seemed very unpopulated. And we got in the car, and we drove down the Rhone River looking for a place to eat, and everything was booked. We started La Pyramide, just went going further and further south. Every single place was booked. Because the old practice of the French traveling down from Lyon they call it the Route Nationale 7 is still in play. They like to drive to the south of France by way of the restaurants. And we finally got into a place which was a hotel restaurant, by pretending we were guests. We got the last table. The guests later showed up, and that was a little painful. We got a table, and they were doing turbot, which I think they grilled a massive turbot, and they served it with a Béarnaise. And I hadn't understood how this sauce goes with fish, and red wine goes with fish. Turbot's so meaty, and it was just a revelation. And I became kind of obsessed with Béarnaise and where it came from, and suspect it actually probably originates in Italy. And it's now one of my favorite sauces. It's a fun sauce.
Another healthy sauce for you.
Another healthy, another
Yeah.
lots of butter.
Oh man. But then you talked about vinaigrettes as well, and making a basic vinaigrette, which is anybody could do, you know. They may not take the time to dice the shallot perfectly, but
And vinaigrette is a great. Well, this is my son, George. In one of his early days when he's finally my son's went to a public school. It was, I could see it from the window where I worked at home. It was like just there. And it was a great school, a little rough, but had again a lot of integrity. Very good teachers. And they had a canteen. It was pictured in the New York Times recently when someone did a story on the fact that they were not serving meat in the schools in Lyon. And they did a picture of a Lyonnais canteen. And that was the very school that our boys went to. Amazing meals. They were 3-course meals, well, usually with a choice of vegetarian or meat, always organic. Starts with a salad, always has a sauce, always has dessert or some kind of dairy thing. And George came back on one of his first days, and he says to his mother, "Mama, I had the most amazing dish today. It was vegetables. It was salad with this amazing sauce." And it was the first time we'd had a vinaigrette, and it is a sauce. And it was, what a way, until that time when we were in New York with them, their meal was like chicken nuggets. And we were trying to get beyond chicken nuggets and ketchup. And then they go to the school and they're liking vinaigrettes, and they all expect sauces with their food. And I remember one Saturday morning or Sunday morning, Frederick came into the kitchen and I was making omelets, and he said, "Oh, Dad, I didn't know you could make an omelet." And his idea was he knew the omelet from his school canteen, but he ate it omelet au nature without any cheese or any fat. It's just a beautiful omelet with beautiful eggs, cooked very delicately, and he fell in love with the omelet. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah, who needs to teach their kids how to eat? The school takes care of it.
that's wonderful. Yeah, your sons are George and Frederick.
George and Frederick, that's right.
And how old are they now?
They are 15 going on 37. They've spent their 10th grade at home and a good part of 9th grade, and they're doing pretty well.
Good.
And they're looking forward to 11th grade.
Well, they certainly had some amazing experience.
They did.
Yeah.
And they're fluent French speakers. I mean, they're certified. They took a test when they finished middle school that the French government administers to confirm or not fluency, and they have the certificate that they are in the eyes of the French government fluent French speakers for their whole lives.
Wonderful. They don't lose it.
They're keeping it up. It's a little harder now, but they're taking French, so, and they have to read books. And
But you are such a wonderful writer, and again, when you describe walking through the countryside or the fields, as I said, I was just right there with you. I could just envision it, and it was terrific. I'm sure, I mean, you can never describe it, but you did a pretty good job. And some of your adventures that were just you and maybe your family out in the fields was just terrific.
Thank you. It was a pretty mad thing that we did. And it didn't mean to stay for 5 years. And I didn't mean to take this long writing about it. I found it very hard to write about it in a way which I captured what we went through. But we had an amazing adventure. I mean, more than anything else, I mean, yes, I went there to learn how to be a French cook. And yes, I had these little preoccupations like the relationship to Italy, to France. And I got really engaged by Lyon and what it represents. But mainly we had just a great adventure where we picked up, we had 3-year-old twin toddlers, and we took ourselves to a part of France, which is not Paris, and it's not very cosmopolitan, and is beautiful but rough, but it's got great heart and a great connection to the French countryside and a great connection to French history. And we made it our home. And we were there 5 years, and our friends were there. And my wife was on the parental board determining the school policy, and I was on the I was one of the few parents prepared to take the children to the public swimming pool so they could learn how to swim. It was a practice at the school that they would take them to learn how to swim, and they would get instruction, but the teachers couldn't be responsible. So a parent had to come in and do a lifeguard training or confirm that he or she could be a lifeguard, and then sign up and take the children to the pool. And for 2 years in a row, they didn't get enough parents. So you needed two, but I signed up, for like 20 sessions. I just sort of embarrassed the other parents into signing up eventually, and they started crossing out my name, and then but it was fantastic. And I was also to be so involved in the school, and then I was all involved in the children. There's nothing like having a panicking child who thinks they're about to drown, and sort of, nothing like French where they're clinging to your neck and you're trying to soothe them. And so they were great experiences. It was a big adventure.
I thought about being there 5 years, and as much as you were doing and as hard as you were working, I have a feeling your wife might be up for sainthood. She probably
that's the exact word that everybody uses. There's a big movement to make her a saint. It's true.
Probably pulled off a few miracles as well.
Yeah, definitely. She's pulled off a few miracles. The biggest one is staying married to me. And I'm grateful for that one.
So you were very diplomatic in the whole struggle between Italian and French cuisine, and you never really took a side. But which do you think were the true originators of like French cuisine?
Well, I would say both the Italians and the French. The way I came to understand is that Italian cooking, and there wasn't in Italy, it was like Tuscan cooking. It was the cooking of Florence and around there. In the Renaissance was very accomplished. And what people often don't realize is that in the great Italian Renaissance, you have a Renaissance in painting, you have a Renaissance in drawing, you have a Renaissance in architecture, you have a Renaissance in city building, and you also had a Renaissance in cooking. And what people did in the kitchen for 2 centuries in Italy was amazing. And unlike anything else that was going on in Europe. And France wanted, in the 16th century, France wanted the Italian Renaissance. They wanted it so much they kept trying to conquer, they kept trying to conquer Italy to get it. And when you see it in that light, it's pretty obvious. And most of the Italian books were being translated into French in Lyon, and they were being picked up and retranslated and used and reused until finally France did get its late Renaissance, and the cooking became the part of the French late Renaissance. Then it became very French, like lots of other things that the French incorporated. But there's no question in my mind that there is basic rustic French cooking, which is wonderful. It's not that different from basic rustic Italian cooking. But what separates each from their own farm cooking is kind of what they do with it. What the French finally did with it is amazing. It's like for the last 4 centuries, there's this codified, deep, thought out, tried out, experimented with cuisine, which has got like 400 years of cooks tinkering with it and going over it over and over and over again. It's a brilliant cuisine. And Italy doesn't have that anymore, because after the Italian Renaissance, they all just went to making pasta, basically. Love pasta, but it's pasta.
But as you stressed also in your book, Lyon happens to be like the perfect storm there as far as availability and what grows in that area and what fish come from that area and the vegetables. And, that's the way today you can get anything, anytime, anywhere, but they were living off the land and the land was the best.
Yeah, there was one Lyonnais, whom I think I cite, who described, because Lyon was always a big city. It was the second biggest city in France. And maybe, I don't know if it was ever bigger than Paris, but it was definitely the second biggest city of France. But it's the only big city it's a rare big city that doesn't have access to a port. It's in the middle of the countryside, and all the countryside kind of flows into Lyon, sometimes literally, because it's got served by two rivers. But mainly everything they did was and everything they ate came within like a 50-mile circumference, regardless like what someone might be able to travel going to the market. And so many great wines are right around there. And there's the great pigs, and there's the great chickens, and there's this whole area where there's an enormous amount of wild fowl, wild birds. And then they got this access to these lake fish and river fish, which is at the heart of the cooking. Brilliant lake fish that you can't get anywhere else in the world, but you can get them there, and it kind of made the cuisine. I think my
Getting a refill over there.
My Lambrusco è arrivato. Grazie, Bella.
Yes, but the name of your book is Dirt. And what made you come up with that name for the book?
Well, the one of the things I was trying to do when I went to France was learn basics. I was trying to learn the basics of French cooking and the basics of French technique. I was also trying to learn what is the taste of French food. What is the really essential flavors of French food, whatever that might be. And in that respect, Bob is very influential, because what is responsible for Bob's amazing bread is the dirt that grows the wheat, that is treated and respectfully, that is then made into flour, which is not treated like a commodity. It's treated like a plant. It's got a limited life. You have to use it. And in the same way, this amazing thing that in France there are, I think the European Union recognized that there are something like 2,500 unique cheeses. And what makes these cheeses unique is the place that each one comes from. The fact that that place preserves how they make their cheese. The fact that the milk comes from cows that have been fed in an area that has a unique environment. And there's almost this like, it all finally comes back to the dirt. One of my really enjoyable, extravagant forays was to go and meet the cheesemakers in the Beaufortin, where they make Beaufort cheese, especially the summer Beaufort cheese. And they get this whole protocol where you go up into the high mountains, you go up just as the snow is receding, and this young summer grass responds to the effects of high summer and the sun, and it produces this amazing summer green food that is then what the cows then eat, and then that ends up contributing to the taste of the milk, and you quickly preserve the milk and you make the cheese right there in the mountains, and you follow this exact protocol to make sure you're getting absolutely the flavor. And I love that. And then the cheese you eat, and the milk. I drank the milk after I was helping milk. I was pretending to help. It tastes of that place, those mountains, that summer, that exposure. And there's a thing I learned later, because there's a peasant practice where they take the animals to the high pastures in the summertime for the better food. But when I was in the Canadian Rockies recently, and I was talking to one of the places that we normally stay when we go up there, and the guy was saying, well, you know, in the spring, all the animals come into the village, and you'll see them, and there'll be lots of moose, and there'll be lots of deer, and lots of elk. But then, as the summer goes on, they all go up to the top of the mountains. And they go up to the top of the mountains because that's the better food. So the practice of going up to the mountains for the better food doesn't come from peasants. It comes from the animals. And so there's this amazing thing of the animals teaching the peasants, teaching where you will find the best food, which comes from, in effect, the best dirt. And it was just, I don't know. One of the things I really appreciated in my experience in France was there's a kind of wonderful fanatic that you see in France who isn't like a food extreme fanatic. It's not like a chef doing, you know, really, really intense sauces. It's just people who respect what your earth can give you and what the flavor of the food that comes from that earth should be. And I grew up on American food, and it's been one of the most exciting things in my life is to keep discovering the authenticity of an intense flavor that comes from one place and nowhere else. And that's what I was trying to get at with the title.
Yeah. I totally understand that. I mean, I love to get out in garden and smell the soil and visit a small farm, and you can smell it. And you know that there's beautiful things being produced. Now, isn't it wonderful that there's so many small local farms popping up now, as opposed to being mass produced on these huge miles and miles of farmland? I think a lot of people, and the restaurants want it too. They want to buy something that was right down the street. And this guy raised the pig right there, grew those vegetables, and we're very fortunate on Nantucket. We have some wonderful small farms here, and there's nothing like using something that was in the ground this morning.
It's one of the great developments in the United States, is a place which is, after all, been dominated by industrial, mass producing farming corporations, is that there's a real surge for the interest in the small farm. And the small farms are able to charge for the unique foods they're producing enough that they can make a living. In France, they haven't made that transition. In Italy, they've made that transition. When I worked for a butcher in Chianti, he knew his meat was unique. It came from places where the cows were raised very, very carefully. It was everything about the way they ate was healthy, the way they lived was healthy, and he was able to charge more for it. It's what it cost. It's what the cost was just basically passed on. In France, there's still a belief that farmers are peasants, and the farmers believe that they're peasants, and they haven't, and everyone depends on them. But there's a generation, at least when we were there's a generation that's ending, and the kids aren't coming up afterwards. I think it'll happen. It's happened in winemaking, where the kids came up and took over the winemaking of their fathers and are making much more money than their fathers did. Winemaking is, there's money in winemaking. In good carrots, at the moment, there's not a lot of money. And in fact, the market, it was painful. I mean, this is now going back, so I hope it's changed, but it was painful how little you had to spend to get like a delicate handmade goat cheese. And it was nothing, but it was this beautiful thing. It was beautiful, beautiful. Or like these eggs that had more flavor and color and intensity, and they cost nothing. Or the hardest ones were the vegetable growers. You could buy kilos, onions and carrots, and they're good. They're from the earth. They're not ruined by pesticides. These are farmers who would never use pesticides because they could never afford them, but you're paying nothing for them. So there's a bump there in France, but in the U.S. it's an amazing thing what's happening. It's a great thing that's happening.
Well, Bill, cheers to you. And it's
Are
a
you
real
drinking with me? What are you
a
drinking?
real pleasure. Yes.
That's not Coca-Cola. What is that?
And I'm hoping that you'll pay a visit to us out here in Nantucket, because I would love to show you around and actually sit down at a table and share a meal and some wine. That would be wonderful.
I'm looking forward to that prospect. Maybe it can happen this summer. We're here this summer. Well, that maybe it can happen. I would like that very much.
I'd love to have you. There's Janet.
Yeah, here we are. I think we have some questions on YouTube. Bobby Planzer says, hi, Tom.
Hi, Bobby.
He's
Nice.
watching live there. Amy, do you want to go first with the questions?
Sure. There's actually a number of questions that want people who would like to know what Bill's next project is. Someone suggests perhaps Asia. I'm wondering what happened to the chocolate project.
Oh, the chocolate project. The chocolate project was a New Yorker piece. It almost broke our marriage. I disappeared into, I disappeared into this fantastic. Basically, I disappeared into the jungle and hung out with a Brazilian chocolate maker growing cacao, and yeah, I came close to disappearing. And that was what precipitated. That's what precipitated the beginning of the book. The book begins with my wife having. We've had basically a pretty cranky 5th wedding anniversary, and we're getting on a train to come back to New York City. And what made the wedding anniversary cranky was that I was meant to go to France, write a book about France. Why aren't I going to France? Why? What's wrong? You were going to do that. Don't write these endless New Yorker pieces that take so much time, and then it's going to ruin your soul, and they're way too long. Just you get in there and go do the thing you're going to do. And that's when this chef, Michel Richard, Washington, D.C. chef, cuts in front of Jessica, and I try to block him. And that is actually how the book began. So the chocolate is responsible for that. Chocolate won't be a book. I don't know. I have a lot of book projects and some book project ideas. I do have a couple smaller things, and I'd like to do smaller things now. I don't want to spend 10 years writing a book. But I've been thinking about Spain a lot, I have to admit. I fell in love with Spain early on. I used to play Spanish guitar. I fell in love with the tragedy of the Spanish Civil War. I'm old enough that I went to Spain for the first time not long after Franco died, and spent a summer living in Galicia. And I don't know. Spain's appealing to me. I might end up in Spain. Though I also can't wait, frankly, until our children graduate and we move back to Europe, wherever it's going to be.
Let's see. There's a question from Rosemary. Have you watched the TV series The Restaurant, set in Stockholm in the 1940s? If so, how does the kitchen experience there compare with yours?
I have not, and that sounds great. That sounds fantastic. Set in the 1940s?
Yeah.
My wife and I watched it. It's very good.
Is it in Swedish?
In subtitles, yes.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you for that. I got to start that tonight. No, I haven't watched it, but I will. So stay in touch and we'll compare notes. I love Sweden. And I'm published there very happily by a great Swedish publisher. And there's a great food scene there. While we were living in Lyon, I got invited to go to Sweden and went around to there. Met different chefs there, including Magnus Nielsen, who ran a restaurant called Favaken, which he's now given up, but very, very successful. I wrote the introduction to his first book. Really, really like. What I like about Sweden, it's sort of the same things I like about the Alps, is that it's, I love the food that you get from these extreme seasonalities. Okay, yeah, pretty miserable in the wintertime, not doing a lot of growing, a lot of root vegetables, hope you're going to be able to dry your beans. But in the summertime, just magical things happen. At one point, I got obsessed with Norway and the whales of Norway. And I got so excited what happens when you reach that. I went way, way high up in Norway, I'm not going to remember what the islands are called. But the magical things happens when the earth tilts in such a way in which you're getting all the sun, just like the Alps for these cows. I think the marginal places, I call it sort of the food of extreme seasonality, are really, really rewarding to study.
I have a friend that lives in Alaska, and her garden, so roses for us grow maybe, a couple feet. Hers grow 7 feet in about 6 weeks.
Fantastic.
It's amazing.
I remember I went up to Lofoten Islands, that's where I was, in Norway, and I made several trips. And I made one trip right after the summer solstice, and it really felt like you could watch, it's like things were growing. You could stand there looking at a flower, and it's growing, and while you're standing there, it's growing. Or you check back a couple hours later, and it will have grown. You have this relationship to the sun and the earth that is so outspoken and out there. Really, really fabulous.
Great. Well, the next question switches gears just a little bit. I think it could be for either one of you, but it's a cooking question. Someone wants to know, what's the trick for the best roast chicken?
Go ahead, Bill.
My trick is not really to roast it. My trick is to cook it really, really slowly in chicken stock, and then to kind of roast it at the end. I spent so much time cooking chickens, trying to arrive at the chicken preparation that I like the best, that my sons won't eat chicken anymore. And then I came up with another trick, which is actually just doing the breast. But if you keep the breast on the bone, I do a thing where I brown them in a saute pan, and then I thoroughly all over and on the bone, and then I'll add some chicken stock and wine and steam them really, 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 really gently. And then we'll put them in the oven to complete the roasting. And my sons, to my surprise, decided they liked this. This was after giving up on chicken, because they got to the point where they go, "Ooh, chicken, no!" I cooked a lot of chickens this year. That was my COVID quarantine dish. I was buying chickens by the box.
Have your children shown any interest in cooking?
George has manifestly shown zero interest in cooking, but he's very happy to be cooked for. He's very happy to have a sandwich made for him. He's very happy to have an omelet made for him. Frederick is, he got very interested in desserts and remains interested in desserts. And then he discovered that he's dairy intolerant, as his father might be to a certain extent. And so it's kind of launched him into he went through a whole period of culinary experimentation of trying to arrive at stuff which was not using dairy. He's pretty adventurous in the kitchen. He is definitely adventurous in the kitchen. We've got a lot of special compounds and equipment that he has now. He's frankly, he's crowding my space. He's crowding my space.
I have a question that could be for either one of you, Tom or Bill. Bill, you talked about the culture of the kitchen and how it was very aggressive and borderline abusive in some cases. And I'm wondering, how has that changed? And also, I imagine more women are getting into the culinary arts and moving up. And I'm wondering if that would all shift the culture or change it, or if that impacts it at all.
When I started out in the late 70s, it was as Bill had described, it's brutal. And also sort of like military, because everything had to be, one of the biggest words that I teach my kids is mise en place, having everything in its place, in a place for everything. And if you're not prepared, it's like throwing a monkey wrench into the works. You have to be prepared. So yes, it was, I sort of liken it to the military, where you have to be precision and everything has to be in its place. And when that doesn't work out, everybody knows it. So it's very stringent.
I've noticed more women going into the kitchen, finding more women going into the kitchen in France. I hope you're seeing it, Tom, and the people who are interested in the culinary arts whom you're teaching. I think a kitchen run by a French woman is still a tough kitchen. And most of the women in France who are in the position of authority have really gone through a lot, and they are tough people. What you don't see in women, though, is sexual abuse, physical abuse, all those qualities that we associate with that wonderful gender we're sometimes referred to as the male species. You'll get aggression, you'll get disappointment. I remember we were the boys and I were we were traveling through France. I think we were already back, and we were traveling through France, and we went to this beautiful hotel restaurant. But we were late, or we were early. We're outside having a lemonade, and the kitchen was being run by a woman, and she was very disappointed. She got very, very angry, and she started screaming at her cooks, and the boys started laughing because what she called them a crapaud. She called them toads. But that was her fury, was that she called this particular cook a toad, and that's okay. I think you can call your people toads. It's much.
I've been called a lot worse.
Yeah, we've all been called a lot worse, and seen much worse. I think a kitchen run by a woman is generally going to be a better kitchen, and I think all the kitchens are changing now, and it's about time. It's about time.
I lived down in St. Bart's for a couple winters, and I worked for a French chef woman. She had a place called Maya's. It was Maya Gurley, and she had various chefs through the years work for her. French guys, they could not take direction from a woman. None of them worked out. And I was one of the first to actually hold the job for a while with her. And she didn't have any formal training, but she was just an excellent cook. And I found myself behind her constantly cleaning up, because at the end of the night, it looked like a bomb went off in the kitchen, but everything she made was just fantastic, and she had a huge following. But the French male chefs could not take direction from her at that time.
Interesting.
Okay, well, it seems like we're about out of time. If anybody has a last question, now would be the time to put it in the chat or the Q&A. And I want to thank both Bill and Tom very much for coming tonight, and for this amazingly great conversation that seemed like it went in many directions.
Thank you, Amy. It was a really great privilege. And thank you, Tom. And Janet.
It was a pleasure. And I know what you're thinking, Bill. You want to send me one of your books with a signature on it from you. I know.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
I'm also
right.
a mind reader. So, but anyways.
How did you know that?
I would really love
email now. So I'll email you, and we'll have an exchange, and I'll get your address.
Yeah, that would be terrific. And this was a real pleasure for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Really, 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 really good. And the only thing I could have wanted more would be to be there in Nantucket. I mean, darn, who wouldn't?
Well, hopefully we can make that happen.
You guys have you're in the lucky spot.
It is pretty great, and hopefully someday soon we'll make it happen.
Good. I'm looking forward to that.